Women can't fly combat missions. They don't have the nerves for it, declared Colonel Stevens as he denied Captain Sarah Chen's request for active duty. The male pilots nodded in agreement, convinced that female pilots were only good for transport runs. 3 hours later, when 50 soldiers were pinned down by enemy fire with no way out, only one pilot was brave enough to fly into the kill zone, and she wasn't supposed to be there. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe courage has no gender and heroes come in all forms, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this remind us what real bravery looks like. The morning briefing at Forward Operating Base Phoenix was like every other until Captain Sarah Chen raised her hand. At 28, she was one of only 3 female pilots stationed at the base, and the only one who kept requesting combat assignments. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for the convoy escort mission," she said, her voice steady despite the snickers from the male pilots behind her. Colonel Stevens didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Chun, you're assigned to supply runs, medical evacuations, transport duty. That's where your skills are appropriate." Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the squadron's golden boy, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Come on, Colonel. Let her try. When she freezes up under fire, at least we'll have it on record that we gave diversity a chance." The other pilots chuckled. Captain Rodriguez nodded sagely. "Flying supplies from point A to point B is different from dodging RPGs. Chun, no shame in sticking to what you're good at." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her hands clenched slightly. She'd heard this speech 100 times in the past 18 months. Women weren't built for combat flying. They lacked the split-second reflexes. They panicked under pressure. They were emotional, unpredictable, weak. "With respect, sir," Sarah replied, "I have over 1,200 hours of flight time, including 400 hours in hostile environments during training. I'm qualified for any mission you assign." Colonel Stevens finally looked up, his weathered face showing the fatigue of a man who'd been having the same argument for months. "Chun, this isn't about qualifications on paper. This is about reality. When bullets start flying and men's lives on the line, I need pilots I can trust completely. No hesitation. No second-guessing. And you don't trust me to do that." Sarah asked quietly. "I don't trust any woman to do that," Stevens replied bluntly. "It's not personal. It's biology. Women aren't wired for high-stress combat situations the way men are. That's just science." The silence in the briefing room was deafening. Sarah felt every pair of eyes on her, waiting to see if she'd argue, cry, or storm out. She did none of those things. "Understood, sir. Supply run it is." As the briefing ended and pilots filed out, Morrison caught up with her in the hallway. "Hey, don't take it personally, Chin. Stevens isn't trying to be mean. He's just looking out for the guys who might depend on you someday." "I appreciate that," Sarah replied evenly. "But someday you might depend on me too." Morrison laughed. "No offense, but I hope that day never comes." 3 hours later, that day came. Sarah was returning from a routine medical supply drop when her radio crackled to life with urgency she'd never heard before. "Mayday, this is Bravo Company. We are pinned down and taking heavy fire. Request immediate extraction. Grid coordinates follow." The voice belonged to Sergeant Williams, and Sarah could hear the chaos in the background. Automatic weapons fire, explosions, men shouting orders. 50 soldiers were trapped in a narrow valley with enemy forces on the high ground. They had wounded, they were running low on ammunition, and they needed out now. "This is Base Command," came the response. "All available aircraft respond for emergency extraction." Sarah changed course immediately, pushing her Black Hawk toward the coordinates. But as she flew, she heard the other responses coming over the radio. "This is Morrison. Negative on extraction. Too hot. Enemy has anti-aircraft weapons positioned on the ridgeline. Rodriguez here. Cannot attempt landing. Kill zone is too narrow. Any aircraft going in is a sitting duck." Thompson reporting. "Visibility is poor with all the smoke. Mission parameters are outside acceptable risk levels." One by one, every male pilot found a reason why the mission was impossible. Too dangerous. Too risky. Not enough intel. Sarah listened to each excuse as she continued flying toward the battle. "Base Command to all aircraft. We need someone to attempt extraction. Bravo Company has multiple wounded and is running out of options. Silence on the radio. Sarah could picture the scene back at base. Pilots looking at their feet, suddenly very interested in their equipment checks. Finally, Colonel Stevens' voice came through, tight with frustration. Any pilot willing to attempt rescue mission? More silence. Sarah keyed her mic. This is Chun. I'm 5 minutes out from the coordinates. Requesting permission to attempt extraction. The radio stayed quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if her transmission had gone through. Then Stevens' voice returned, incredulous. Chun, did you copy the other pilot's assessments? This is an extremely high-risk situation. Yes, sir, I copied. I'm still requesting permission to attempt extraction. Another pause. Chun, these are combat soldiers in an active firefight. This isn't medical transport from a secure landing zone. Sarah could see smoke rising in the distance now, black pillars against the desert sky. Sir, 50 soldiers need extraction. I have aircraft capable of carrying 40 personnel per trip. I can get them out. The landing zone is under direct fire. Chun. Enemy positions are entrenched on surrounding high ground. Anti-aircraft capabilities confirmed. Understood, sir. Still requesting permission. Back at base, Stephen stared at his radio in disbelief. Every one of his experienced male pilots had assessed the situation and declared it a suicide mission. And now the female pilot he'd grounded from combat operations was volunteering to fly into hell. Morrison grabbed the radio from a nearby operator. Chun, this is Morrison. Don't be a hero. You don't understand what you're walking into. This isn't like the simulations. Sarah's voice came back calm and steady. Jake, I understand perfectly. 50 soldiers are going to die if someone doesn't get them out. I'm going to get them out. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but I'm still going in. Stevens took the radio back. He thought about the political nightmare if the only female pilot at his base died attempting a mission his male pilots had refused. He thought about his own career. Then he thought about 50 soldiers waiting to die. Chun, you are cleared for rescue attempt. God help us all. As Sarah approached the valley, she could see why the other pilots had refused the mission. The landing zone was a narrow strip of desert floor surrounded by rocky ridges. Enemy muzzle flashes sparkled from at least a dozen positions on the high ground. Smoke grenades created a haze that limited visibility to maybe 50 meters. That IT was a perfect kill zone. She switched to the ground frequency. Bravo Company, this is Extraction Bird. I need a hot LZ prepared for immediate pickup. Sergeant Williams' voice crackled through the static. Extraction Bird, be advised we are taking continuous fire from multiple positions. Landing zone is completely exposed. Recommend you abort. Negative, Bravo Company. I'm coming in. Pop smoke to mark your position. Ma'am, with respect, this is not a good time for heroics. We've got wounded, but we don't want to add to the casualty count. Sarah smiled grimly as she began her approach. Sergeant, I'm not being heroic. I'm being a pilot. What happened next will be talked about in military aviation circles for decades. Sarah didn't attempt a standard approach. Instead, she came in fast and low, using the ridgeline to mask her approach until the last possible second. She popped up over the ridge at full speed, immediately dropping toward the landing zone while enemy fire erupted around her. Bullets pinged off her aircraft's armor plating. Warning lights flashed on her console. But Sarah's hands were steady as she flared the helicopter and touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Load them up, she yelled over the radio as her crew chief kicked out the rear doors. The soldiers moved with desperate efficiency, loading wounded first, then able-bodied troops. All around them, enemy fire continued to rain down. Sarah could see muzzle flashes getting closer as enemy forces moved to better positions. 30 seconds, her crew chief called out, and RPG streaked past Sarah's cockpit, close enough that she could feel the heat. Her aircraft shuddered as something struck the tail boom. Warning alarms screamed in her headphones. We're taking damage, her co-pilot shouted. I know, Sarah replied calmly, adjusting her controls to compensate for the damaged tail rotor. How many more? 10 more soldiers. Another RPG exploded nearby, showering the helicopter with rocks and shrapnel. Sarah's windscreen spiderwebbed, but held, She could feel the aircraft wanting to yaw to the right as the damaged tail rotor struggled to maintain control. 5 more. Enemy soldiers appeared on a nearby ridge, setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun. Sarah knew they had maybe 30 seconds before that weapon came online and turned her helicopter into scrap metal. Last man aboard. The crew chief called. Sarah didn't wait for confirmation. She pulled collective and twisted throttle, lifting off as bullets sparked off the landing zone around them. The damaged helicopter struggled to gain altitude, yawing badly as she fought the controls. But they were airborne. 47 soldiers were crammed into a space designed for 30, but they were alive and they were flying away from the kill zone. Extraction successful, Sarah reported over the radio, her voice still perfectly calm despite the fact that she was flying a barely controllable aircraft filled with wounded soldiers. Proceeding to base for medical drop-off. The radio erupted with voices, other pilots offering support, base command requesting status updates, medical teams preparing for incoming wounded. But through it all, Sarah focused on the simple task of flying her damaged helicopter home. She made it. The landing was rough. The damaged tail rotor made precision control nearly impossible, but she set the aircraft down safely at the medical pad. As the wounded were rushed to waiting ambulances, Sarah shut down her engines and sat in her cockpit for a long moment. Her hands weren't shaking. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. She felt fine, like she'd just completed another training mission. Colonel Stevens was waiting for her when she climbed out of the cockpit. His face was pale, and for a long moment he just stared at her. "Chun," he said finally. "Sir, how did you stay so calm? Flying into that hell, every one of my best pilots said it was impossible." Sarah looked at the smoking helicopter behind her, then at the medical personnel, still working to save the soldiers she'd extracted. "Sir, someone told me once that women don't have the nerves for combat flying. I guess they were wrong." Stevens nodded slowly. Behind him, Morrison and the other pilots stood in a group, watching Sarah with expressions ranging from shame to amazement. "Chun," Stevens said, "report to my office tomorrow morning. We need to discuss your new assignment." "What kind of assignment, sir?" Stevens managed a smile. "Combat operations. Full authorization. I have a feeling we're going to need pilots with your particular kind of nerves." As Sarah walked toward the debriefing room, Morrison caught up with her. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. No apology necessary, Jake. You flew according to your training and assessment. My training didn't prepare me for what you just did. That was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever seen." Sarah paused. "Jake, can I tell you something? It wasn't incredible flying. It was just flying. The only difference was that I didn't let fear make the decision for me." "How do you not feel fear in a situation like that?" Sarah thought about it. "I do feel fear, but I also feel responsibility. 50 soldiers were going to die if someone didn't act. Fear of dying myself seemed less important than that." The next morning, Sarah reported to Colonel Stevens' office to find her status officially changed to full combat operations. Her first mission was to lead a squadron of male pilots, including Morrison, on a complex operation behind enemy lines. As they walked to their aircraft, Morrison asked, "Any advice for flying combat missions, Captain?" Sarah smiled. "Same advice for any flying, Lieutenant. Trust your training. Trust your aircraft. And remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." That mission, like every mission Sarah flew afterwards, was completed successfully. And never again did anyone at Forward Operating Base Phoenix suggest that women lacked the nerves for combat flying. Because Sarah Chun had proven that the most important qualification for a combat pilot wasn't gender, size, or strength. It was the willingness to fly into hell to bring soldiers home. And that willingness had no gender at all.